Imagine awakening in a world where iPhones vanish, inexpensive clothing disappears, and prices skyrocket threefold. This scenario isn't science fiction. It's a potential reality looming in the coming months. China, the workshop of the world, is nearing its breaking point. While we see made in China products everywhere, a crisis of comparable magnitude to the Great Depression is quietly unfolding within this superpower. Millions of people live in cars, and countless homeowners are losing their properties amid a collapsing economy weighed down by mounting debt. In this discussion, we'll examine the true state of affairs, exploring why the world's largest manufacturing nation is faltering and how this will affect us all. This isn't just about one country's downfall, it's a story set to alter global dynamics. Back in the early 1980s, the average income in China was on par with Africa's poorest regions. Then, a transformative economic revolution took hold, built on a straightforward principle: open up to international markets, attract investment, and establish China as a global production hub. Mass migrations from rural areas to cities ignited a demographic boom, while factories thrived on cheap, plentiful labor. The government invested heavily in infrastructure. Highways, airports, factories, and entire cities rose from nothing. This industrial surge fueled an export craze, turning made in China into a mark of affordability worldwide. Over the next 40 years, more than 800 million people escaped poverty, an unparalleled improvement in living standards in human history. The social contract was simple: economic growth brought prosperity, and political interference was kept minimal. Western leaders praised China as a model to emulate, proclaiming that the future belonged to the East. Today, China is a top producer of electronics, textiles, and countless goods shipped globally. But what if these successes rest on deep structural problems now erupting with destructive force? Take Sun Wei, a young marketer from a major city, who poured his savings into an apartment in a new residential complex. His parents were peasants, and he was the first in his family to receive higher education. Owning a home was meant to symbolize his generation's triumph. Yet now, instead of a house, there is an abandoned construction site. The developer vanished with his money, but the bank's loan lingers. Sunway is among millions of investors deceived by the real estate bubble, place where real estate has become almost a religion. The sector accounts for roughly one-third of the economy, an unprecedented concentration for the modern world, even surpassing the relative size of the real estate market before the 1980s financial crisis in the United States. The entire system relies on a model similar to a financial carousel, fueling endless borrowing and speculation, which now threatens to spin out of control. Citizens financed housing up front, covering the costs of land acquisition and new development projects before construction even started. This funding mechanism worked seamlessly until a decline in demand led to a surplus of vacant homes. As a result, numerous ghost towns have sprouted across the country, exemplified by Neumann, a city originally designed to accommodate 800,000 residents, where fewer than 20,000 now live. The paradox is striking. While rural areas are filled with unoccupied buildings, housing affordability in major cities has reached crisis levels. On average, a family must save for approximately 35 years to afford a modest apartment, compared to just 8 years in London and 12 in New York. This extreme inaccessibility fueled the rise of an underground financial ecosystem, developing alongside the official banking sector, a vast shadow industry comprising investment funds, management firms, and intermediary services, thrived without regulatory oversight. It emerged out of market distortions. Traditional banks offered cheap loans to state enterprises at preferential rates, yet private businesses and regional authorities urgently needed financing, leading to the growth of alternative structures that pooled savings at high interest rates for risky investments. These tempting promises, 15% annual returns amid official inflation of only 3%, drew in many depositors, especially as state banks yielded merely about 2% on savings. By the year 2020, Shadow's loans in this sector ballooned to more than 40 trillion yuan, surpassing half of the official economy. This figure represents an iceberg, the visible tip being regulated banks, and beneath the surface an unregulated financial underground. Such dynamics prompted widespread real estate purchases, seen as a primary hedge against inflation and currency devaluation. The pyramid of investments continued to grow, attracting new participants at each step. Since limited foreign investment, a closed stock market, and near-zero bank interest rates left few alternatives, real estate became the sole avenue for preserving wealth. The government actively supported this trend, relying on land sales to developers and banks willing to extend mortgages. Cultural factors also reinforced this pattern. Owning property was seen as essential for starting a family, creating a vicious cycle. Rising property prices validated the belief that investments were sound, attracting more buyers who feared a collapse of the market's seemingly inevitable growth. Looking ahead to the mid-21st century, the country risks losing 250 million working-age citizens, equivalent to the entire population of Brazil, over just 3 decades. This demographic decline would strip the nation of its workforce, consumers, and taxpayers. The root cause traces back to the family planning policies introduced in the late 70s, when population controls were deemed necessary. Today, however, these measures have yielded catastrophic socio-economic consequences, undermining the very foundation of growth and stability. The decline in birth rates has plummeted to a tragic 1.2 children per woman, far below the simply sufficient 2.1 needed for population replacement. Even after lifting restrictions in 2016, the situation showed no signs of improvement. Young people now shy away from starting families, discouraged by the staggering costs of education and housing. Over the next 2 decades, more than a third of the population will be over 65, creating a stark demographic shift. The mathematics of this trend is alarming. One working individual will need to support multiple retirees, yet the social security system remains unprepared for such a burden. Meanwhile, the country's total debt surpasses 280% of its gross domestic product, a figure akin to a family earning 100,000 rubles annually, burdened with debt of 280,000 rubles and constantly borrowing, much of it hidden in unregulated lending sectors. Local governments, unable to take official loans, established front companies to fund infrastructure, illustrating the flawed incentives that fueled this crisis. Economists like Wang Hui from Shanghai explain that officials prioritized bonuses and promotions tied to launching new construction projects, not their economic viability. This created an illusion of rapid growth, masking mounting debts while official reports painted a rosy picture. When the pandemic-induced lockdowns and shutdowns struck, the fragile financial structure revealed deep cracks, which have since widened into cracks of greater severity. Worryingly, signs of widespread unrest have emerged, despite a long-standing history of suppressing protests. For the first time, Groups of homebuyers in unfinished developments have organized mass refusals to pay mortgages, starting in central provinces and quickly spreading nationwide. The slogans, "We refuse to pay for emptiness," resonate as authorities attempt to quell these protests, but the discontent continues to grow geographically. Equally concerning is the rising trend of a sedentary lifestyle among educated youth. A generation raised in an era of economic growth is now abandoning ambitions of career advancement and family life, questioning the logic of investing in real estate or raising children when housing costs rival private jets and parenting demands a small fortune. Many conclude it's more practical to work minimally and forego future plans altogether. Sociologists note a shift away from traditional Confucian values such as filial piety, hard work, and family cohesion. In a nation where work once defined purpose, a new wave of conscious minimalists is emerging. Youth unemployment has soared to 22%, with 1 in 5 struggling to find suitable employment. Engineers work as couriers, economists as dishwashers. A movement has even developed where people choose to live in their cars, as rent consumes over half of their income, making a vehicle their most affordable refuge. As of March 2025, the trend of living in cars is rapidly spreading among China's youth and migrant workers. This phenomenon impacts not only the unemployed, but also those with modest incomes who cannot afford urban rents. Entire communities of car dwellers have emerged on social media platforms where they exchange experiences on managing life on the move, share tips on the best spots for overnight stays, and discuss ways to economize. Authorities have sought to curb this practice by banning overnight parking in city centers. Yet the number of car-based dwellers continues to grow, reflecting the scale of the issue. Simultaneously, the nation faces an unprecedented technological blockade. The United States has restricted exports of advanced semiconductors, sophisticated software, and crucial manufacturing tools. The fallout has been devastating. Huawei lost access to Android and American-made processors. Smartphone sales plunged by 75%. Manufacturers of supercomputers are cut off from Intel and AMD components. The aerospace industry cannot acquire modern engines, and the autonomous vehicle sector struggles without the latest driving technologies. A developer from the state center, Lu Wei, notes that after 8 years of developing a processor for quantum computing, they realized all production was dependent on American equipment, leaving them cut off from global progress. The country that aspired to lead in innovative technologies now faces the daunting task of rebuilding from scratch, a process expected to take at least 20 years and trillions of dollars. The pandemic accelerated a structural crisis. Strict quarantines disrupted supply chains, factories shut down, and ports operated intermittently. In response, global firms began diversifying their production networks, with giants like Apple, Tesla, and Microsoft seeking alternatives. Yet, as efforts to stimulate the economy increased debt levels, reducing debt risks causing economic decline, creating a dilemma of choosing between immediate disaster and future hardship. Foreign investments have collapsed to levels unseen in a quarter of a century, further worsening the plight of the largest corporations. Construction firms in particular suffered. One notable example is China Fortune Development, a company emblematic of the construction boom over the past 2 decades. At its peak, it managed assets valued at around $200 billion, constructing entire neighborhoods and generating employment for hundreds of thousands. Its business model, purchasing farmland at low cost, obtaining permits and selling apartments before construction, seemed brilliant, with eager buyers lining up to make down payments on homes existing only on plans. Founder Wang Wexue became one of the wealthiest individuals in the country. However, this growth was based on flawed assumptions. New projects were financed through advancing future apartment sales, risking a bubble that could burst when the market conditions changed or financing dried up. The initial inflow of funds was quickly directed toward acquiring new land holdings, fueling an expansion boom. However, as market conditions deteriorated, this fragile growth unraveled, triggering a chain reaction of financial collapses. The bankruptcy of China Fortune marked a pivotal point, leading to the downfall of major developers like Kaisa Group, Shimo Group, and Greenland Holdings, with dozens more firms declaring insolvency. In Xuhua's account from Guizhou, she recalls how wages had been delayed for half a year with false promises of improvement, only to be followed by warnings that 2 decades of work would be lost. The collapse of the construction sector immediately impacted related industries. Builders of materials, metals, and chemicals lost their main clients, resulting in millions of job losses. Banks that had extended loans secured by land faced a surge in bad debts, pushing regional financial institutions toward the brink of failure. Local governments, heavily dependent on land sales to developers, sometimes accounting for up to 90% of their budgets, lost their primary revenue source, making it impossible to fund essential services such as education, healthcare, and social welfare. Remote cities felt the pinch through widespread delays in salary payments fueled by the mounting crisis. The central government, overwhelmed by the scale of losses, found itself unable to adequately intervene or stabilize the economy. Internationally, the repercussions were equally severe. As the world's largest consumer of raw materials, the country's slowdown caused global prices for iron ore, copper, aluminum, and oil to plummet. Miners in Australia, metallurgists in Brazil, and oil workers in Russia all felt the impact. Exporting nations faced economic contractions, their currencies weakened, and international supply chains began to fray. Companies across continents struggled with shortages of components and rising costs. Recognizing the enormous scope of these impending shifts, it is crucial to prepare in advance to mitigate their effects. Here are 5 practical steps to safeguard your finances. First, stockpile essential equipment and goods now, including smartphones, laptops, appliances, and clothing, as Chinese product prices are expected to rise by between 20 and 40%, especially for electronics and children's items. Second, reassess your savings. Diversify away from yuan or rubles and consider holding more stable currencies like the US dollar or euro to protect your assets. Third, invest in yourself by developing new skills. Learning profession-oriented fields such as digital marketing, programming, or data analysis ensures better job security amid changing conditions. Fourth, build a financial safety net. Aim to save at least 10% of your income, creating a reserve equivalent to 3 to 6 months of expenses to withstand unforeseen difficulties. Fifth, stay alert to new opportunities. Despite crises, new markets emerge. Products from India, Vietnam, and Turkey could become valuable alternatives. Exploring new brands and suppliers is essential, as those who pioneer often gain the greatest advantages. The fundamental principle remains: stay calm and prepare ahead, because proactive actions usually lead to more favorable outcomes. But what specific scenario might we face? Considering all the key factors, the demographic decline, mounting debts, technological restrictions, and a real estate downturn, experts outline three primary possibilities. The first is a soft landing where the economy slows gradually to about 2% annual growth, all while preserving social stability. In this case, the nation sustains its status as a significant global player, yet its once energetic dynamism diminishes. Living standards stagnate, innovation hubs shift elsewhere, and social mobility sharply declines, echoing Japan's stagnation in the 90s. This pathway involves a prolonged period of minimal growth. The second scenario is a hard landings, characterized by widespread bankruptcies among developers, triggering chaos in the financial system. Banks burdened with bad debts, regional governments deprived of income, rising unemployment, and social unrest follow. Local crises quickly escalate into global repercussions. Consumer electronics could become 40% more expensive, clothing 25%, and automobiles 20%. Meanwhile, international trade might shrink by 17%. Energy markets wobble, and currency fluctuations create months-long turmoil. The third is a path of successful transformation, where authorities seek ways to pivot the economy toward domestic consumption, foster innovation in key sectors, and address demographic issues. Most independent analysts view this as highly improbable in the near future. Achieving such a shift demands radical reforms of the financial system, effective social protections, and technological breakthroughs, changes that leave little time before crises deepen. Given its role as the largest global consumer of industrial goods, this country significantly influences prices for raw materials and energy. An economic slowdown here would cause prices for oil, gas, metals, and food to collapse. Russia, heavily reliant on energy exports, would feel this impact immediately, along with Brazil, which depends heavily on salt ore markets, and Australia, facing a catastrophic drop in demand for coal and natural gas. Conversely, global restructuring presents opportunities. Countries like Vietnam, India, Mexico, Bangladesh, and the Philippines could seize the emerging niches in the international division of labor. Increased production capacity in these regions would attract investments, bring in new technologies, and generate jobs. For consumers worldwide, however, this shift means rising costs. Prices for electronics, textiles, furniture, toys, and household appliances would climb significantly, accelerating inflation across the globe. Central banks would be compelled to raise interest rates to curb these pressures. Geopolitical tensions are rising sharply, with history illustrating that diminished powers often turn inward, resorting to external conflicts to divert attention from domestic issues. Such dynamics threaten to ignite sudden and severe escalations, especially in strategically vital regions. Financial markets are increasingly jittery. Every news development triggers notable swings in asset values. As a result, investors are increasingly flocking into traditional safe haven assets like U.S. Treasuries, Swiss francs, and tangible gold, creating a historic opportunity for the United States and Europe to lessen their dependence on Asian manufacturing. However, this shift will come at a steep cost. Redirecting trade flows would require many years and trillions of dollars invested in new infrastructure. The Asian economic miracle has convincingly shown the world that mass poverty can be eradicated within a single generation. Yet it also confirms a fundamental economic truth. Endless growth through debt accumulation, with ongoing deferral of consequences, is unsustainable. What is your view? Is Asia poised for a swift recovery or heading towards a prolonged downturn, Feel free to share your thoughts below.